Thanks very much for joining us. We had a real massive turnout for this webinar, so I do appreciate that. This is Teamwork Analytics, and it's our new calls and meetings webinar. And this is the first launch session around calls and meetings. So we're going to split this webinar up a little bit into kind of a business value section and then a technology section. So on the business value side, we're going to talk about how Teamwork Analytics helps drive adoption, ensures governance and lifecycle management, and then the vast majority of the time we spent on calls and meetings, because that's the newest feature in the Teamwork Analytics product. Once we've gone through all the business value, we're going to go into some of the technology, because we know we have some people on who are super interested in the Azure piece, the Logic apps, all the kind of feeds and speed stuff. So we'll go through some of that. We've got time for questions. Do fire in questions as we go, and we'll keep an eye on them and try to answer some as we go. But also we'll have 5 minutes of questions at the end. And then we're going to use some details of how you can put Teamwork Analytics to the test in your environment. Just a quick intro for us. I'm Tom Athnott, Principal Solutions Architect, and I've got my colleague Sean with me. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sean Murphy, a technical product owner within Teamwork Analytics and a managing consultant.
Great, thanks. So before we kind of get into product, I mean, this is probably preaching to the converted, but Teams is obviously on a massive growth tear. It's been crazy, and obviously the pandemic has been a big part of that. So it's now up to 145 million daily active users. I know Modality have been involved in doing some pretty massive migrations and pretty aggressive migrations away from Skype for Business and other platforms as well. And we're starting to see more and more growth in the calling space now as well. Lots of that growth is around meetings and online meetings. And there's a kind of a follow-up to do around real collaboration based on the data we see. So we see lots of meetings, lots of chat, and collaboration is definitely on the climb. But something we've seen as a theme with back to the office or kind of hybrid working is customers talking about how they ensure calling and meeting quality, how they get the maximum value out of Teams. Maybe they're decommissioning the PBX, that kind of thing. So very hot topic at the moment. So where does Teamwork Analytics, which is Modality's product, play? Well, there's three things we drive. We drive productive adoption of Teams. And you might think that who needs adoption for Teams? Like everybody's using Teams now, but there's a lot to what we call productive adoption, so really making the most of it. We ensure Teams governance and compliance, and we'll talk about how we do that. And number three, and again, the new thing which we're launching on this webinar, is promoting really good quality calls and meetings experiences. So I'll drive through 1 and 2, and then I'll hand over to Sean, who is the product owner for our calls and meetings module. So Teamwork Analytics, from a product perspective, it's kind of 3 pieces. It's automation, which is sending adaptive card messages or private messages in Teams to users. So we can directly instruct users, survey users, get them to agree to different policies or terms, all within Teams. It's alerting, which is more your IT pro, something needs looking at type alert. Maybe it goes into ServiceNow, maybe it goes into some other service management tool, maybe it's Teams, maybe it's email. And last but not least, it's really deep Power BI reporting. So across the whole stack, we're leveraging Microsoft technology. We're leveraging Microsoft for the automation, the bot framework. We're leveraging Logic apps for alerting. And of course, we're leveraging Power BI, which just gives us an immense amount of power to slice and dice and understand data. So it's Microsoft stack through and through. Also, a little bit unique is Modality are obviously an SI and a managed service company as well as a software company. So we do have the option of a services wrap from our customer intelligence team, and that team can help you make sense of the data, help you install the product, but also they can help you with automation, alerting, configuration. And many of our larger customers choose to take a service wrap as well as the software. And just to kind of give you an idea of where it is in the real world, we have it across multiple verticals running actively now. There's some customer stories there. I won't go through each one, but we're very keen on measurable change. So we don't want you to just buy Teamwork Analytics and then sit it there. It's not just a reporting product. We're trying to drive a change or drive an impact. And if we get the chance to talk one-to-one, we like to talk with customers about what change are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to drive more country to country collaboration? Are you trying to tidy up your team's estate and reduce the number of abandoned teams? And then we'll look to measure that impact, all while saving costs in terms of operations through things like automation. So happy to talk through any of those particular customer stories, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the types of people we're working with and some of the results we've got. So number one, driving adoption. This is where Teamwork Analytics really started, and it started 3 years ago, way before any kind of big changes in the way we work and things like the pandemic. But I think it's as relevant as ever. Teams is definitely more than just chat and meetings. Meetings adoption is pretty easy. I mean, you knew how to schedule a meeting in Teams in Outlook before. You swap out WebEx for Teams, you swap out Skype for Teams. People will join the meeting because that's part of what they do. But Teams is also collaboration, it's also document sharing, it's also apps, it's a whole lot more. So ensuring you're getting maximum value out of Teams is more than just enabling it for meetings and calling. And the way we can drive adoption is pulling lots and lots of data out of Microsoft Graph on how Teams is being used. We can target messages to end users. And that targeting is bespoke to the individual customer. So we can change the way we target, we can change the text. So you might want to drive video usage, you might want to drive increased collaboration, you might want to drive more cross-department engagement, for example. But the key thing is it's not just blasting people with training content, it's looking at their actual usage and sending them relevant tips, training content, suggestions. The change management teams tend to love our Power BI reporting because we can go right from a global level down to individuals, even things like how often they're being mentioned, how they're applying, who they're engaging with. You can completely control the level of reporting you do in terms of retention and PII and visibility. So things like German Workers' Council, maybe you need to anonymize German users, you can do that, and really use the data to identify real Teams champions. Who are the people in your business who are the leaders in terms of achieving what you want to achieve with the platform? So here's some scenarios for adoption. And again, I'm going to keep this brief because we're going to spend most time on calls and meetings. But we could target users who are using just meetings, but they're not doing any chat or collaboration. We might target people who are doing lots of meetings but not using screen sharing or video, so they're using it like an old school conferencing platform when really maybe screen sharing or video would drive engagement. You can do things like prompt users who are being mentioned in channels multiple times but not replying, and we've even seen customers look at gamifying this, so giving prizes and rewards to their top users to kind of positively incentivize users to use Teams. On the alerting for adoption, it's less relevant for alerting generally, but you can use alerting for things like specific downturns in usage. So if you have a large organization, your change team want to know if a significant change has happened, they might look at average usage at a country level, and they might want to be prompted when a particular country has a significant downturn, for example. And on the reporting, we can slice and dice by any Active Directory attribute as well. So we can really get into the weeds. You can see here, I've got engagement between departments. I've got who is talking to who within departments in Teams, and we can slice this at the Teams level or at the department level or any other Active Directory attribute you have. So governance and compliance, number two, super important, and this has been the hottest topic in terms of the product so far, really, because good governance is so important, not just from a security and compliance and fines and GDPR and ISO point of view, but also for adoption. If you let teams sprawl out of control, abandoned teams, unowned teams, no activity, teams with duplicate names, we've seen it have a direct impact on adoption. So people see 3 teams called sales, they don't know which one to use, so they will just jump into private chat, or even worse, they'll jump into email and they'll start collaborating over email rather than in Teams. So good governance and lifecycle management can really impact your users' experience and adoption. Some examples for governance and compliance. Here, we're using automation really to drive a full lifecycle story. So from the graph data, we can see when a team's created. So we could ping the owner to say, hey, here's our policies for public teams, do you agree to them? Or we can even survey the user to say, hey, we need this additional information. How long do you expect this team to be available? Is this team going to have any guests? Who is the owner of this team if you're going to move on? Whatever you want to survey the owner, you can do that directly in an adaptive card. And you can also have buttons in the adaptive card to say, I agree to the organization's policies for this particular team type, for example. Right through the life of the team, it can be things like chasing for a minimum number of owners, confirming the owner is accepting the organization's policy as far as guests go, chasing inactive guests. So one of the things we would recommend is if a guest isn't active for a certain amount of time, you remove those guests from the environment. So maybe you need to ping the owner to say, hey, these guests have been inactive for this amount of time. We're going to kick them out of your team because they're inactive. And everything about this is automating as much as possible. So we don't want to just give you reports and give you a job to do. We want to set up automating and alerting to ensure that day to day, the way you want teams to run, it's run. And still, there'll be exceptions. So maybe alerts go to the governance team or compliance team if a team hasn't been deleted and it's inactive for more than 90 days. Or maybe the compliance team use things like our reporting to ensure that they know globally everything is in line and compliant as far as their standards and their policies and their procedures go. So that was a bit whistle stop for usage and governance. We have done previous webinars on them. I'm happy to dive into them in more detail, but we wanted to give across most of the time to calls and meetings. So Sean, I'll hand it over to you. I don't know if you want to steal the screen share.
Yeah, I will steal. So great, hopefully I'm presenting. So yeah, just looking at the third component that Tom was talking about around calls and meetings experiences. Just reflecting also on some of the statistics, so the importance of calls and meetings, as Tom was saying about the daily active users. There's some continued statistics here around twice as many people using video, and this is around Microsoft's quarterly results last year, but you can obviously see the continued growth and the importance of things like video usage increasing 1,000% in a specific month, 2.7 billion meeting minutes in one day, increase in numbers and calls per week, just extensively growing, and a really interesting statistic about 90% of large enterprises are going to be flipping for telephony onto direct routing and PSTN connectivity by the end of 2020. So really that sort of accumulates to an experience really. Tom was talking about it earlier around the hybrid working. So, post-pandemic and then people or customers returning to office, and a bit of a hybrid scenario in terms of the experiences and the interaction end users and customers are having with teams. So there's some statistics we pulled from a peering company called Peer5, that are basically saying that if only half the amount of employees return to office, they'll bring video habits working from home back into the corporate office. Meaning typically in a corporate office, you might be in a huddle room or using a Teams meeting room, or you're just using less video because you're interacting more. Whereas when you're at home, you're obviously doing a lot more video calls. So that bringing back that experience into the office is a key consideration. Common customer challenges in terms of what we get from customers is how do we address the perceptions of poor performance, provide clear visibility around networks, look at the support of the ROI for teams and the service as a whole for our stakeholders and to ensure it's performant. Really about key insights into the behavior and the adoption specifically the adoption, as Tom was talking about earlier, but to realize the real true business value. How can we reduce the human effort? So automation is clearly a key activity and feature point there, and reduce any financial costs of chasing problems across the networks and devices specifically. So we really put this into a few boxes effectively, just as examples. Like devices are really common, and there's probably no single strategy that's more important for audio quality, and probably the most neglected area around quality other than devices. So how they're being used, are they certified devices? End users at home typically default to using speakers and built-in microphones, etc., which have a suboptimal performance and experience. Reliability, so can I maintain a call? Can I set up a call? Where are my failures? Which users, which departments are failing the most? How does that impact the productivity within the organization? And then network, so understanding core network components. I'd say typically a lot of customers are at home and working on Wi-Fi. Is there connection problems? Do users have relay or connectivity issues out to Microsoft? And all of that is backed by usage. So really understanding the relevance of those three components. But are certain departments answering calls or not answering calls? Typically, before the pandemic, they might have been having more activities, but are they less performant in that way? What PSTN digits are even being dialed? So are we calling from America to the Middle East more commonly, and why are we doing that? So all of that activity and insight really drives into calls and meetings. So what does quality experience really mean? A good experience would be a user being able to make and join calls, make meetings, making sure that there's no uninterrupted natural conversation, can see the other person well in terms of videos and can be seen, can follow a presentation and the meeting shared with no problems, and can really focus on the conversation at hand, the topic. A bad experience in reflection of that would be someone can't join a call, which would be obviously hugely unoptimal and would impact productivity, and has challenges just joining the meeting or the meeting dropping for that given person. Difficult to hear people, echoing, background noise, stuttering, sometimes called jittering, robotic noises is another common description that we hear. But effectively not being able to get the speech across, and the conversation's lost, and obviously the context of the meeting can diminish pretty quickly. And obviously video, which is really important, especially with remote working, whereby video is either blurry, out of sync, or frozen is a common description. And where the presentation seems to be laggy. So as I'm sharing here, it's obviously going through quite fine. But if if we were on slide number 1 and we were talking about slide number 20, that would obviously have a real impact to the flow of the conversation. So really, it's about the end user being distracted by the technology and a suboptimal experience. Tend to focus on and achieve within calls and meetings is looking at the key performance indicators from Microsoft. So this is very network orientated, but packet loss, jitter, round trip are the common ones, as well as more of the advanced network metrics. Ports and protocols, so understanding if you're going over the right UDP ports versus TCP, are you going out via the right relay to Microsoft? Are you hitting the right media relay ports from Microsoft? Connection types, so looking at the difference between wired and Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is probably the most common, especially from a home perspective, most common connection to use. But actually, Wi-Fi has a more degree amount of complexity to it. So looking at, is your access point, is a certain access points having issues? Is a certain port, certain frequency, certain channels being saturated, etc. Core reliability is probably one of the most key areas. So setting up a call, maintaining a call, and looking at failure reasons, as well as headsets are being certified optimal, making sure there's no issues with the driver versions or any of the quality metrics that are around headsets. So really, it's about understanding the network impact on teams, looking at the KPIs, seeing if they're exceeding certain threshold values, looking at good connectivity, looking at connection details, identifying and remediating network or firewall issues, and learning where the majority of your failures may occur. And also, very important, looking at microphones, speakers, and headsets and the impact on quality. And as Tom was saying earlier, we split this into key features. So reporting is really important, so getting insightful reporting, and then using key features like automation and alerting. Teamwork Analytics calls and meetings does in terms of providing that is we have an Azure component, an architecture that has multiple deployment options. It can be SaaS hosted, can be customer Azure tenant, can be something called CSP, Cloud Solution Provider, which Modality is, where we can manage that in your tenant. There are multiple of options that we have with deploying our architecture and product. We leverage Power BI really heavily. All of our reports are built on the Power Platform and take into consideration all of the key components that Power BI give you in terms of drill throughs, exports, subscribing to emails to reports, pinning dashboards, etc. All of that is leveraged within Teamwork Analytics. It obviously reduces the human and financial cost of chasing problems by using key features like automation. And really, it's about displaying the evidence and the ROI to stakeholders and service managers and key people within your organization. So a common question we typically get asked is, well, okay, well, how does that compare to CQD? And there's a feature comparison chart here. In the middle is Teams calls and meetings. And some of our key features, obviously, we can do trend reporting because all of that data we're holding or holding in your tenant, depending on your deployment option. We can hold it for any period required. We get the data within about 1 minute committed into the database from the API, which is super fast. And we do that at scale. So it's hugely robust, hugely performant. We're leveraging all of the components and scalability and performance of the Azure architecture. We have components like alerting using Logic Apps, and there's workflow integration into Logic Apps as well. So there's connectors that integrate into notification systems like email and Teams, which I'll show you in a demo in a few seconds, and into ITSM. So really integrating into your business processes like ServiceNow and incident management systems. Bot automation, so using Microsoft's bot framework. So emailing or direct messaging direct out to users, increasing that behavior and that change and that adoption directly out to users and influencing. Because we have the data, we can custom score the data. So networks can be quite complex for some people to understand some of the metrics and the thresholds. We can actually look at it in a 0 to 10 ranking in terms of how you can distinguish quality at a high level just based on a score or a low level based on a numeric, for example.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on CQD. Obviously, we have lots of customers who use it, so we're spending a lot of time making sure we're adding value beyond what's in the box, really.
Yep. We also got AD integration, so we can pull in custom attributes like departmental information, the rank. So if you were wanting to look at execs, for example, with the exec title, and you had that in your AD structured, we could look at rank down to country and even into custom attributes that you'd set.
Yeah, probably worth jumping onto the report, Sean.
Yeah, sure. I'll just jump straight into some of the reports. So hopefully you're seeing my browser now, which is looking at some of our calls and meetings usage information. So just going to quickly go through a handful of them, but effectively they're all laid out in a sort of folder and subfolders depending on the areas you want to look at. And here we've got some usage statistics looking at meeting organizers, start, end time, duration, minutes, participation, and the certain media types that are used. We can get straight into dashboards. So if we wanted to look at that in a more high level, wanted to look at how users are joining via audio by type. Is it PSTN? Is it VoIP? The split between desktop share, audio and video, and all of the filters here. As I was talking about the AD integration, we can look at that accounting level if that's a department.
There's been lots of interest in how Teams calls and meetings is being used. So not just performance, but we've rolled out phone system to 50,000 users. Are they using it? How many calls are they making? How many calls they're receiving? Are they doing video? Are they doing desktop sharing? So the Call Records API gives us all that data, which is super interesting from a usage and adoption, or sometimes even a kind of a call logger point of view, like which calls are being made where and to who.
Exactly, yeah. Call logging is something we have as well. So just even what PSTN digits are being dialed the most. So what's the first 2 digits down to region country level? Can we see certain PSTN digits that are effectively being dialed more frequently than others? And why does that occur? What's the split difference? How many calls are associated to those digits?
You should be seeing here that the reports load really fast. So we're not using direct query, we're caching the data in Power BI. So it should be really performant even at massive scale.
Yep. And then straight into something like a call logger here where we're capturing every single log. But specifically, one of our demands really is looking at unanswered calls. So is there, are there certain calls that are being unanswered by certain departments? Can we look at unanswered and then look at everyone in legal who might not be answering calls, for example? And then if I jump to more of our performance areas, because we were talking about quality area earlier, we've got the key performance indicators. So a trend of things like packet loss, jitter, round trip over time by, again, looking at each of the varying filters, and then even down to where they're exceeded. So not having to know the threshold values, but actually I can see certain dates where they're effectively higher than other days. So what's going on in certain periods of time. And all of our reports are effectively interactive. So they drill through from a given date, and then they're automatically filtered on that day down to detail level. So we can go straight down into stream level details. We can take all of the level of information. We can look at all of the stream levels, which is here. Here. And we can get effectively a really verbose level of information to start troubleshooting on. So, stream direction is really important. Was it a callee, caller? All of the given metrics that are typical for Microsoft. But we even go further looking at bandwidth, forward error correction, packet utilization, media type, was it bypassed, BSS ID information, Wi-Fi radio types and bands, driver versions.
So we can go right from like a global view of KPIs, like here's where you should spend your time, right down to individual users or individual streams. So if someone says, I'm having a bad experience, we can literally see their endpoint or their streams. But more generally, you can see at a global level as well, where you would spend your time trying to drive quality improvements.
Yeah, and then we have that for each of the metrics. We've been a bit scientific. So if you wanted to look at packet loss over a certain percentage, you can look at effectively a bucket of packet loss. So you really want to look at the most aggressive packet loss on your network. Well, actually, we can look at where there's 40% and drill through and get into the stream level details and see who's impacted. One of the key standout reports for me is something called a KPI tree. So really it's about how that's associated. So if we took packet loss here, we would start and branch out, hence the word tree, and we'd see which country is affected the most. We could click on Paris, understand, is it audio, is it video that's more affected? Well, actually it's video. What's the connection type? It's Wi-Fi. Is it the caller, callee? Is it internal, external? And again, you can drill through into all the details that would allow you to troubleshoot from there. Got tons of reports, but I'll flip quickly into some of our device reports as well. So looking at the difference between distinct external devices, so headsets, and built-in devices, looking at the trend of the information, who's using what, which country are using which device type on board.
This is so important for quality. Actually, the codecs on Teams are way better than Skype ever was. You can get away with a lot from a network perspective, but using poor devices, and we've seen that go up in home working because not everybody has the certified device at home, or they get bored wearing a headset. So knowing who's shouting at their PC mic and speakers and impacting the whole conference quality is super important.
Yeah, and we get right down to verbose level information like noise levels received for the headset, right down into event level information as well. So things like clipping and echo. And then you can look at the different drivers in use or headsets in use, and then drill through into which users are using those specifically. Understand the driver version as well to see if they're on suboptimal versions or an increment difference. So tons of information. Failures, which we were talking about earlier. Failures are really important. So looking at the split of failures by given dates and periods, and the failure reasons, and looking at some of the details. So is it wired? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it a mid-call failure? What stage does it fail at? And again, all of these are drill through. So you can right-click, drill through on that given period, and it will automatically filter for that day. And then you get a verbose level of information on the failure stage, the reason, who is impacted, what connectivity they're on, and all of the level of information to troubleshoot.
That's probably a good point to jump into the automation and alerting, Sean, maybe.
Yeah, thank you for keeping me on time, Tom. So alerting is driven from logic apps. So just a quick view of logic apps. It's effectively a way of setting reoccurrence and using SQL to effectively pull in data to allow us to troubleshoot and to set alerts on certain thresholds. So we effectively create a flow and a connector to generate alerts at certain percentages. So here we've set an alert at 20% for failures. We've put in some custom wording in an email body, and we've posted to a channel. And when that alert's triggered, you can set it at different thresholds. If you want it to be alerted pre that happening, or you wanted to know if things were healthy, you could also do that. And you could also, understand the impact if it was, excessively exceeding that alert.
Yeah, so this is all logic apps, so you can tune, or we can do it for you, tune exactly what you want to alert on. And we really believe on only alerting on things that matter. You can look at the reports daily, weekly to find issues, but you can set your thresholds in logic apps to say this is a real significant change, not 1% packet loss change. Like that happens, it's the internet, but like a significant number of calls over a significant period of time have been impacted, or a significant number of endpoints have been impacted.
Yep. And they're all interactive. So this is an example of a channel message that's been sent to one of my colleagues who's picked it up, and you can click within interactively within the message, and it will bring you to the given report as well. So it's a very connected workflow. I'll jump straight back to the deck because I know we're a bit short on time, but effectively, yeah, this is all of the information just listed out for you that we just went through. Another key feature as well is you can ask questions of the data, so you can start typing in questions about show me users in United Kingdom, Wi-Fi and their relay port, and the data brings back the answer for you. So really leveraging all of the great things that Power BI gives us. Automation is obviously a key part as well. So notifying users of poor networks, not using certified devices. We can reach out to them post-call and say, actually, you were on an unoptimal headset. Please, change your behavior and make it interactive, and gain insights to managers and look at things like PSTN usage if licenses are not being used correctly because you've got PSTN but you're not using it. This
is again where we're trying to save operational time here. So there's no way you've got time to chase every individual who's not using a certified headset. With automation, you can do that, and you can target in a really clever way. So you don't want to jump on somebody if they once use their laptop. You want to say, in the last X calls, let's say 10 calls, 7 times out of 10 they've used their laptop, and then I know that they've been issued a certified device, and I want them to use that. So you can tune your threshold for those automations, and you can tune the messaging. Yeah, good point. Let's jump onto the technology, and then we'll get into some questions.
Cool. Yeah, the technology, as we were talking about earlier, is really built around Microsoft's Graph API, using the communications API and a sub-construct of that API called call records. Our key features are automation, alerting, and reporting. And as Tom was saying, really, the pillars are around usage and governance, and a lot of the detail around today is around calls and meetings. Really, what that looks like under the hood is it's all Azure native, so it's all Microsoft technologies. It's built for scale and performance, multiple deployment options, hosted or deployed in your Azure tenant, or supported by us in terms of a CSP managed solution. There is obviously Azure Logic Apps and automation and technologies built there, and we're really using comprehensive components within the architecture, cloud components, mainly webhook functions, record passing, scheduling functions, event responses, data collectors and stores.
Yeah, it's all very deliberately Microsoft end-to-end and able to deploy on your tenant or run as SaaS. So that's quite unique, we think, for us, is that we're running at, and Sean will talk about scale here, but we're running at some really big scale in really big customers, but we don't only have a SaaS option. So lots of solutions will be SaaS first, and that's great, but maybe you want to control where your data goes in terms of RBAC and policy and audit logs. If you go with the customer tenant option, then you can have it directly on your tenant.
Yeah, so there's a statistic here just from one of our, it's actually our largest customer, around just over 300,000 end users, and they're processing up to 8 million call streams a day. So the processing speed there is about 92 call streams a second. So we took in our development, because we wanted to push the platform and see what the edge was. We effectively scaled up and we tested some processing by queuing up 100,000 calls effectively, which is roughly around 750,000 streams. And then we pushed it to 2,000 calls streams a second, which is something like 20 times faster than our largest customer. So it really proves the sort of unparalleled performance of the architecture and scaling and benchmarking that we go through with the cloud compute.
Yeah, so we've had quite a lot of questions. I've answered some in the chat as we've gone, but we'll just jump straight into questions. So someone said, what licensing do you need? So you do need Power BI Pro for the readers of the reports, not for all users, but for the readers of the reports. Everything else is Azure Compute. And if you go SaaS with us, we cover the Azure Compute. It's a per user, per year cost. If you go customer Azure tenant, then you pick up the compute costs. So, and there's a calculator to work that out. There was a question about reporting on Microsoft Teams rooms. We can report on Microsoft Teams rooms that they're Teams endpoints. They do give call records and usage stats. So either we filter them by the device type, the device ID, or we filter them by the user account. Can I see if guests are getting good quality performance? Sean, do we get guests?
Yeah, we get guests.
Yeah, yep. So that's good to know. Can you report by location? Yeah, that's super important. So we pull in subnets in the same format as Microsoft CQD. So if you completed that Excel kind of CSV format, we can pull that in. But we also have Active Directory attributes. So we can report on location, as in your Active Directory location is UK, and some customers like that because they want to report on the UK team's performance regardless of where they happen to be sitting. But if you want to report on the St Albans network, you can filter by the subnets related to the St Albans network. So with lots of people at home, obviously knowing the performance of your team regardless of where they are is important, and you get that with call records. But zeroing in on the hybrid working and back to the office, you can monitor your actual office subnets to make sure you're getting the performance you need there.
Yep. Good question.
There's lots of questions about finding specifically bad calls and meetings, which we can do through the KPIs. Do you get quals information? Everything we're getting is from Microsoft Call Records. So we get all the network performance as Teams sees it, packet loss, jitter, latency, but we're not doing any client-side plugins or any network taps or anything like that. So we can't see if the packets were labeled for quals. Interested if that's a requirement, love to talk one-to-one, because we're hearing less and less about that when it's a internet service, but super interested to hear more. There's a couple more we'll reply directly, but Sean, if you want to go to the final slide. So here's details for a trial, and this is really how to make sense of this. Really, we think this is the best way to understand it. There's a short link there, mod.qa/TDWA trial. You can sign up. If you go with SaaS, then it's just a click to give read access to graph. It will pull the data. You install the reports in Power BI and you can have a look. If you want to deploy it on your tenant, there are ARM-based templates which deploy it in your tenant. But if you just fill in that form, someone from the customer intelligence team will reach out to you with the options. And thanks very much. We've had a really massive attendance live. I know lots of people will be watching the recording as well too. We'll be following up with one-to-one opportunities to discuss more in the next couple of days, and we'll be pinging out the recording and the deck as well. So anybody who wants the recording or deck, that will be coming. But yeah, with about a minute to go, I don't think there are any last minute questions. So thank you again for taking the time to attend. Remember that the 1, 2, 3, driving adoption, governance and compliance, and quality of meetings, that's what we're trying to achieve and measure, and we'd love to get it into your hands and see how you think about it, and more importantly, get your input on what automations, what alerts, and what reports are important for you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Talk to you all soon.